2022 was an excellent year to run a car price analytics YouTube channel. Price movements were unbelievable. At the beginning of the year, most prices were still surging following the pandemic, but by the time that spring arrived, momentum decreased considerably. Two-digit price increases were replaced by one-digit increases, or even a flat development. What happened during the summer was then also inevitable. Markets topped almost across the board and prices started to decrease. In the fall, the initial decrease rate accelerated slightly, but has been relatively stable ever since. And this means that most cars are again depreciating assets, like they should be, but there are always exceptions. Some cars have such a high scarcity level that they can outperform the market. And in this video we'll have a look at the top 10 sports and supercars that outperformed the market in 2022. Let's dive straight in it. Over here you can see a histogram that shows the year-on-year price change for most cars that feature on my channel. So what can we see here? On the horizontal axis you can see the year-on-year change magnitude bins. For example, this bin over here represents the cars that lost between -2.9 and -7.9%. On the horizontal axis, in turn, we can see that this concerns 39 cars. So for 39 cars, prices decreased by -2.9 to -7.9%. And as you can see from the height of the bar, this is the largest category. Moving to the left, we can see that there are 26 cars that lost between -7.9 and -12.9% during the last year. Moving to the right, we can see that there are 22 cars for which prices changed between 2.1 and -2.9%. Now looking at this picture, it's no surprise that the median price decrease is -4.8%. So this is the price decrease that applies to most cars. I don't think that this comes as a surprise to you if you're subscribed to the channel. Now those of you who were sitting at the front of the classroom during their statistic lectures will recognize that this distribution over here does not follow something called a bell curve. In simple terms, this means that the outline of the bars does not follow the shape of a bell. The bars are not decreasing symmetrically when you move away from the largest category. No, we can see that this distribution has a heavy right tail. There are a few cars with rather extreme price changes. Two cars saw prices increase by 7.1 to 12.1%, while there's also one car for which prices increased between 27.1 and 32.1%. And this is to some extent the result of the cars on which the graph is based. I mainly track the values for sports and supercars of which I think that they may show price increases or have some sort of interesting price development. This histogram is therefore not based on the complete car market. It is based on popular sports and supercars such as Ferraris, Porsches and McLaren. Hence, it's based on a sample, not the complete market. A second important limitation is that the individual price changes are not always based on exactly 12 months or December of this year versus December of last year. So sometimes the change is based on November 2022 to November 2021, or, for example, November 2021 to December 2022. I think you get the point. And this of course means that we cannot read too much into the details. If one car dropped by 3.5% and another one by 4.5%, it might be the result of chance, or simply a slightly different time period. However, we can trust that a car for which values increased by 10% has stronger prices than a car for which values decreased by 10%. But let's take a more detailed look after those administrative messages. Over here we can see the data on which the histogram is based on. Each bar represents the price change for a different car, and I left out the names of the cars on purpose. It would be too small to read. Now in this video we'll focus on the right hand side of the graph, so the cars that increased in value the most. Next week we'll focus on the left hand side, so the cars that lost the most value. If we zoom in to the right hand side, we can see that there are 30 cars for which the values increased. And just by browsing through these names, we can see that many 911s and Ferraris made it to this side of the graph. That is not so surprising. Values for these cars are usually quite strong, and they make up the largest share of the cars for which I'm tracking the prices. However, we can see some more surprising results. With -0.2%, the LC500 is included. Prices did not increase so much, but they have been exceptionally stable in this market. Moving to the right, we can see that also the F-Type SPR is included. This car had an extremely steep depreciation curve from new. Jumping even further, we can also see that the Land Cruiser J80 is included. And this is not really surprising, but it is interesting nonetheless to see it over here between Ferraris and Porsches. Now finally, it's noteworthy that the Lotus Evora made it to the list, a car for which values came down a bit from the new prices, but remained quite strong after that. But let's zoom in to the top 5. We can see that the 911 996 is included 2 times, first as the Turbo and second as a GT3. And this is no surprise. 996s belong to the cars that benefited the most from the price surge. Also the inclusion of the 987.2 Cayman, 599 and F355 is not surprising. If you followed the market update videos throughout the year, you might have seen this coming. But let's evaluate the price trends for the top 5 and where possible also have a look at the average listing time for these cars. After all, these price increases don't mean so much if the cars are just gathering dust and don't sell. We'll start with the Cayman and end with the F355. Over here we have the price trend for the Cayman 987.2, the base model to be precise. And this is immediately a controversial trend. Prices increased by 8.4% between November of this year and November of last year. But as you can see, the price trend fluctuates significantly and the confidence intervals are large. And that's because this car is incredibly rare. On average, there are only 8 cars listed for sale. This makes it more exotic than some cars which are typically labeled as exotics. A consequence of this is also that we cannot fully trust this 8.4% increase. Depending on when exactly we look at the data, it might have been 3%, 5% or 10%. However, we can see that prices remained relatively stable. They tend to fluctuate around $35,000 and this stability is no surprise. The Dot 2 fixed many problems from the Dot 1 generation and still featured hydraulic steering. And with that we move on to the Ferrari 599. We can see that prices increased by 9.5% between January 2021 and October 2022. And this is based on all 599s excluding the GTOs, 60 years and Alonso editions. And when we dig a bit deeper into the data, we can see that the cars with the HGTE package delivered a significant contribution to this increase. Nevertheless, the price trend looks still strong. Prices are up by 45% compared to October 2020. But just as in some other markets that we discussed and will discuss, supply is relatively low. It fluctuates between 14 and 39 cars. Prices are quite high, and compared to 1 year ago they are still up by 9.5%. That's a decent result. But are these cars actually selling? Unfortunately, I don't have any data available that shows the actual time it took to sell the car, but I do have a good proxy, the average listing time for the cars. Over here you can see that the average listing time for a 599 is 92 days. However, the numbers fluctuated a lot and this fluctuation pattern is akin to what we can see in many other markets. When prices soared at the start of the pandemic, the advertised time decreased rapidly. Yet, somewhere halfway 2021, things swing the other way. Perhaps prices became too high or demand just fell. We can see that the advertised time started to rise again. Right now, it is approximately at pre-pandemic levels, and this signals to me that the market is more balanced than before. Now, I didn't run any statistical analysis to investigate the relationship between the advertised time and the prices, but common sense dictates that the advertised time might be a good predictor for the prices. And if that's indeed the case, this graph would show that it's unlikely that we will see a new price increase anytime soon. This listing time analysis and the ones that you will see in the remainder of this video are by the way based on data from AutoTempest. AutoTempest conveniently pulls listings from a bunch of different websites into one place so that you can browse through all of them. Check out the links in the description to find the 599s for sale right now. But let's crack on with the 996 Turbo. Over here we have the price trend for that car, excluding the S models and cars with the X50 package. Now, I already covered this market in last week's 911 Turbo video, so there is some overlap. But in case you haven't seen that one, let's check out what we have here. You can see that prices increased from $63,500 in December 2021 to $71,500 in December 2022. In other words, prices increased by 12.5%. Just as in many other markets, prices stopped during summer. This means that they decreased by 6.5% during the last 6 months, and this decrease is relatively small compared to the increase that we saw before. Compared to June 2020, prices are still up by 43.5%. The long-term trend is then also still pointing upwards. Now before we continue, I would like to mention that there is a slight difference between the automatics and the manuals. The manuals are obviously more expensive, but the price increase is also slightly larger. However, we will not dive into that split right now. Supply is limited, and this means that we need to take a decent amount of time to interpret the price trends. So I will save that for a different video. Instead of looking at the transmission type split, we'll look at the split for the different mileage buckets. We can namely also see at a more granular level that the price trends are strong. Long-term trends for cars with less than 63,000 miles are still trending up. High mileage cars, so the ones represented by the red line, show a more flat development. But we also need to be aware that these trends fluctuate more than the aggregate trend, simply because the number of cars behind each trend is smaller. Another important thing to mention over here is the premium for extremely low mileage examples. The premium decreased slightly during the last 6 months, but you still need to pay 20% more if you want a car that has a mileage between 0 and 28,000 miles. Now, one of the reasons for these strong price trends might be the limited supply. We can see over here that there are currently only 38 cars listed for sale. However, what might be more important is the direction of the supply trend. It is clearly pointing down. Supply on a standalone basis is not a great predictor for prices, but it is common sense that a decrease in supply with an equal demand level is likely to result in strong prices. Looking at the listing time, we can see that this is on average 56 days, and this is a lot lower than in the 599 market. What is the same though is the pattern. Listing times dropped rapidly during the price surge, but are now back at more normal levels. Again, this could indicate that it is unlikely that we will see a new price increase anytime soon. And with that, it's time to have a look at the third car on the list, the 996 GT3. We can see that prices increased by 20.8% between January 2022 and October 2022. The trend is then also still pointing up. However, just as in the Cayman 987.2 market, supply is very low. Usually there are 6 to 7 cars listed for sale. So again, we cannot rely too much on the exact price increase, but we can see that in general the market is still strong. The data though does hold up when we look at a more granular level. Over here we can see the development split by the mileage buckets, and this reveals a few things. We can see that it are the higher mileage cars that kept their value the best during the last few months. However, when we look at a longer time horizon, we can see that the low mileage examples increased the most, and perhaps a bit too much. They went for insane premiums during last winter. More recently though, values decreased slightly in this category. It's interesting though that the development in the advertised time is different than in the 996 turbo market. On average, a 996 GT3 is 79 days advertised for sale. This is approximately 20 days more than a turbo. However, we can see that the trend is more stable. There is no clear drop when prices surged. Rather, it follows this sinus-like pattern and fluctuates around the average, and this could indicate that the current high price level is justified. Let's move on to the last car, the Ferrari F355. But before we do so, if you enjoyed this video, please support the channel by clicking on the like button down below. Thank you. Over here we have the price trend for the F355 market, and you can see that prices increased by 27.7% compared to December 2021. And this is to some extent driven by the Targas. Prices in that segment more than doubled, but also the regular Spiders didn't perform bad. Prices increased by 14.5%. Now, as we discussed many times by now, supply is relatively limited in this market. There are usually around 20 cars for sale, so when it comes to the price changes, we cannot read too much into the details. And with that, it's time to wrap up and conclude. The Cayman, 599, 996 Turbo, 996 GT3 and F355 belong to the cars that saw the largest price increases. And as you might have noticed, they have a few things in common. They're all relatively old cars, that provide an analog driving experience. With several doom and gloom scenarios for ICE cars on the horizon, this is something that we might see more frequently. Another thing that they have in common is the low supply levels. Many of these cars, and especially the ones that are in exceptional condition, are not easy to find. However, with exception of the GT3, the patterns in the listing time development seem to indicate that it is unlikely that we will see another significant price increase in the short term. A stable or downward price development is more likely. Prices decreased in most markets, and we will see the most extreme examples in next week's video. The list looks nothing like the one we looked at today, but it's an interesting one nonetheless. It, for example, includes a brand new Ferrari. That and more we'll discuss next week. I will also include then a little channel update as to what you can expect for 2023, so stay tuned for that. And with that we arrived at the end of the video. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week for a new video.